Welcome back to these series of lectures on Western civilization. I'm going to take a few moments and talk about the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras, so you're familiar with these terminology and with the significance of the transition from one to the other. We'll develop this further in other lectures, but we'll start here by talking about the Paleolithic and the transition to the Neolithic. Now, Paleo, the Latin for old. Lithic is Latin for stone. So this is the Old Stone Age. Neolithic, obviously, neo-new, the New Stone Age. So let's characterize these two and see if we can gain some understanding of them before we get deeper into the details. The Paleolithic era is the time period that humanity has spent most of its existence here on this planet. The Neolithic era really doesn't begin until a round figure would be about 10,000 years ago. This transition takes place in what today we call Mesopotamia, along or between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, extending from the mouth of the Persian Gulf northward into Turkey. And then if you follow what's called the Fertile Crescent, you can see that this development will continue through Palestine and then the Nile River Valley in Egypt. Paleolithic is generally in high school, I guess the standard description of Paleolithic would be hunter-gatherers. You probably have heard this. Paleolithic people are nomadic. They spend 24/7 or 365. They spend looking for something to eat. You can't support a large population when you're constantly grubbing and scavenging for food. So Paleolithic populations tend to be small groups of wandering nomadic people, forever in search of shelter and something to eat. Neolithic people, on the other hand, are settled farmers. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 years ago, the people there in Mesopotamia and in Turkey discovered that seeds could be planted and crops grown to produce wheat would be the obvious example. And then from wheat, of course, we can produce bread. And bread rapidly becomes the sort of the essential and fundamental dietary item there in Southwest Asia. Not only do we domesticate plants like rye and barley and oats and wheat and rice, but the Neolithic people began to domesticate animals as well. And you see a large variety of creatures available for domestication there in Southwest Asia and Mesopotamia. Sheep and goats, horses, cattle, pigs, chickens. We can go on, dogs, and there are other animals scattered across Eurasia and Africa that are domesticated. So this is the key transition here in human history, moving from small, wandering, nomadic populations to settled populations of much greater numbers. Once you settle, once you have a dependable source of food in domesticated plants and domesticated animals, then you can begin to have more and more children. More children will survive into their adulthood, and you begin to get increasing numbers of people. Now, this, of course, is going to lead to civilization, which we talked about earlier in one of our first lectures. What exactly is civilization? Civilization is utterly dependent upon stored food, an abundance of stored food. If you have this, you don't have to spend your time constantly searching for food. This gives individuals an opportunity to do something else besides searching for that next mushroom or finding that next dead carcass from which we can maybe break the bones and suck the marrow from. Instead of spending all of our time doing this, perhaps we could spend time developing a writing system. Perhaps we could spend time contemplating the seasons, contemplating the motions of the celestial bodies, thinking about religions, thinking about power and politics, We're going to need certain people to protect our village, aren't we? The emergence of metallurgy and of military tactics and martial institutions. We're going to need people to control the flow of the rivers, engineers to create dikes and canals so that we can properly irrigate our crops. We're going to need people to work in leather, to create saddles, to create people who could work in leather and metal, and to create jewelry, to create ornaments of beauty. Again, it all goes back to an abundance of stored food. Once this is available, then the options for humanity are endless. So stored food gives us specialization and an abundance of crafts and skills and large numbers of people. And then here, obviously, you have the emergence of cities and civilizations. So this is the key moment in human history. We've only been in it for, like I said, about 10,000 years. Most of our history on this planet, we were not a terribly special mammal. We were simply another creature wandering the savannas of East Africa. But in time, the development of language and the ability to anticipate the future and to contemplate the past is going to make us a remarkably powerful animal, one able to exert our will over the environment, one able to domesticate fire, and of course to domesticate plants and animals. Can you imagine the domestication of fire? Fire must have appeared to Paleolithic man as something alive, something that's animated, it's moving, it can inflict pain upon you if you touch it. It can reduce trees to rubble. It can turn raw meat into meat that is cooked and much easier to taste or to chew and to digest. So we're beginning to learn how to do these things, how to domesticate the natural world around us. This is going to make us an incredibly impactful species. Today, you can see that if you pay attention to the science journals, you can see that human behavior may be having catastrophic effects on our planet. The sixth extinction, it's called, the Anthropocene, is that extinction brought about by human activity. We're kind of in the early stages of investigating this, but it's a terribly intriguing topic. And it comes from this explosion of creative activity born of the Neolithic revolution, where we create hierarchies, we create specializations. And again, we do this because of an abundance of stored food. So we've left the Paleolithic era behind. That's where we spent most of our time. And we have been living now in this Neolithic era for about 10,000 years. What I want to do in the next lecture is to go into this Neolithic era in a little more detail by looking at the emergence of civilizations in Mesopotamia, and then afterwards in the Nile River Valley in Egypt. So I'm going to stop there with this introduction to Paleo and Neolithic, and we'll pick it up again next time. Thank you.